Hi, my name is Micah McKenzie and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please remember to like, share, and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that way you always know when I post a new video. Okay guys, so this weekend I went to go see Candyman. Alone, I might add, and I'm very proud of that fact. So I wanted to bring you guys my honest reviews on the movie. I'm going to break down my review into the overall message, plot/script, world building, and execution. And since this was a horror film, I'm also going to be adding the horror category as well. Nia DaCosta's Candyman is a direct sequel to the 1992 film of the same name. I know it can be quite confusing since practically all of the sequels have the same name for the most part. I can definitely tell that the writers were totally using their imagination on this one. Anyway, you don't have to necessarily have seen the 1992 film in order for this movie to make sense, seeing that most of the important plot points get explained in this new movie, but I'm going to briefly sum it up just so that way you guys understand where I'm coming from. So, in the original film, Helen Lyle and her best friend Bernadette are grad students at the local university who are doing their thesis on how they believe urban legends have a certain hold over the community members of the Cabrini Green projects. While doing their research, Helen comes across the horrible murder story of Daniel Robitaille, a Black man who was lynched in the 1890s for falling in love and impregnating a wealthy white woman, whose spirit is now known to haunt the Cabrini Green projects as Candyman and is seemingly responsible for a string of murders that have happened in the projects. This figure is said to be summoned by standing in front of a mirror and saying his name 5 times. I'm Black, so we won't be doing any of that shit. Helen, not believing in the myth, tells the children in the projects that Candyman isn't real and they have nothing to be afraid of.
Candy milk, give me. Candyman isn't real. He's just a story. You know, like Dracula or Frankenstein. A bad man took his name so he could scare us. But now that he's locked up, everything's gonna be okay. Candyman ain't real? No.
Big mistake. The community or congregation, as Candyman puts it, is what fueled him and gave him his power. Candyman, of course, then appears to Helen and tells her that she must shed innocent blood to restore the fear in his congregation. Helen then mysteriously shows up at a string of murder scenes, and a baby boy named Anthony McCoy from the projects is kidnapped, and Helen then becomes the prime suspect. In the end of the film, it is revealed that Candyman was in fact real and responsible for kidnapping Anthony McCoy after Helen retrieves him and returns him to his mother, Anne Marie, during the project's annual bonfire. Helen, weak from fighting and exhaustion, dies in the fire and joins Candyman in the afterlife and eventually becomes part of the urban legend that is Candyman. The new film picks up with Anthony McCoy as an adult, although he has no knowledge of his life at Cabrini Green or Candyman. Anthony is a new and up-and-coming artist who is searching for inspiration for his newest art piece. His handler then suggests something along the lines of gentrification for what is happening in the Black neighborhoods of Chicago, which leads Anthony to unknowingly discover his past in Cabrini Green and learn about the legend of Candyman, making it the inspiration for his new piece. And then, of course, the rest of the movie happens. Now, on to my actual thoughts for this movie. In my opinion, the overall message or theme of this film was exploring the fact that while urban legends may change, the fear always remains the same. The film manages to do this by switching the perspective in which the movie is told. Unlike the 1992 film, this movie is told from the perspective of Anthony, a Black man, whereas the original film features Helen's perspective, a white woman with a slight white savior complex. Through Anthony's talks with Burke, one of the sole original community members from the Cabrini Green projects, we learned that Candyman's identity has changed over time, but the story remains the same. An innocent Black man is always killed by a white angry mob of some sort, making it an issue of hurt and pain that transcends time and is passed on from generation to generation. The film, of course, draws lines from the racist white plantation owners that killed Daniel Robitaille to police officers, a commonly held truth that is clearly visible in today's time period. If anything, this change of perspective showed that the story's details can change, but the overall fear and message will remain the same. While that may sound like a compelling and interesting thesis, I can't exactly say the same thing for the script itself. While watching, I couldn't help but feel like the writers just assumed that the audience would be able to make sense out of their broad strokes. Like they expected us to connect the dots without giving us all of the numbers. There were so many plot holes and storylines that I felt like just weren't explored to their fullest potential. For example, Brianna, who is Anthony's girlfriend and also an art curator, has a nightmare after Anthony tells her about the legend of Candyman for the first time. In this nightmare, she relives the moment where she watched her father, who was also an artist, commit suicide as a child. This is a moment that I felt like the writers definitely should have harkened back to, especially as we see as the film continues, Anthony becomes more visually and visibly unhinged. The nightmare just seemed to be a randomly placed piece of info to make it appear like someone had put some thought into the character's past, but didn't actually do anything for the character development itself. Another issue I had was the relationship between Anthony and Anne-Marie, or the lack thereof. Based off the first movie, we know that Anne-Marie was an absolutely dedicated mother to Anthony. However, it's never explained how or why their relationship is so strained now. Again, this connection could have been something that totally added multiple layers to the film, but it just simply wasn't used. As we previously discussed, this film was a direct sequel to the original. So of course there are some allusions to the original, but the film mostly builds upon the existing lore. In this film, there are multiple Candymans. Girl, I don't know. I just know that there was more than one, okay? So there are multiple Candymans in this film, and it's shown that the murder victims clearly died from supernatural causes. Unlike in the first film, where the audience is left to wonder whether or not Helen actually killed these people in a deluded frenzy, or if Candyman was responsible and just so happened to put her at the place of the crime. Candyman is also only visible through mirrors or reflective surfaces and can travel in between them, and often is able to trap his victims in this way. This created a more direct and physical approach, whereas Tony Todd's Candyman was displayed as more mental, psychological, and hypnotic.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come. Be my victim. Be my victim.
I'm gonna review the execution and horror together because I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a huge scaredy cat, okay? I don't really do horror, and when I do, I instantly regret it, especially when it's time to turn off the lights and run up the stairs. Don't look at me like that. I know you all do it too. That being said, this movie just wasn't horrifying for me, personally. The film kept the original's ambiance of the uncanny and unsettling feelings and darkness, but I just don't feel like it was used to its full potential. There were several moments in this film where I could feel a possible jump scare coming, and then they just didn't happen, allowing the previous heavy moment of suspense and tension to go completely unused. Although the film fell flat in some of these moments, the use of shadow puppets to tell the origin stories of the Candyman was a really great touch. I think that Jordan Peele and some of the other writers really took to the criticism that a lot of Black people had, that they no longer wanted to see Black trauma or Black pain on the screen. So having the traumatic stories explained through shadow puppets was a really great compromise, in my opinion. I also noticed that a lot of YouTube people have said that they felt like the use of social commentary ruined the horror in this film by being too overt, but I kind of have to disagree with that on that one. We have to remember that the original legend itself is based on racial trauma, so it only makes sense for it to appear in the sequel. I would say that this feeling of overtness comes from changing the perspective from a white woman to a Black man. Helen was just a visitor to Cabrini Green. She could come and go as she pleased without any threat from the neighborhood cops. Anthony, on the other hand, who is a Black man, is extremely cautious not to be seen by the neighborhood cops and is overwhelmingly aware of how his identity makes him look in certain spaces. It's an issue that most Black people know all too well. Others have also mentioned that in this film, all of the victims were white, unlike the previous film, which honestly makes the most sense to me. I never understood why Tony Todd's Candyman was so hell-bent on tormenting the residents of Cabrini Green when he was killed by a racist white mob. Like, make that make sense. That being said, I do wish that the community of the Cabrini Green projects was shown more throughout this film. The script talks a lot about the gentrification of the Cabrini Green projects, but we don't really see how this affects the people outside of Burke. I feel like Anthony could have interviewed or come across any of the former inhabitants of the projects to possibly maybe fuel the fear and lore of Candyman while he was researching his past. Kind of almost like Tinkerbell.
Do be some fairies.
I do. I do.
Candyman needed people to be afraid of him in order for him to appear. While most of the other Candymen don't have the same gravitas or presence as Tony Todd, the movie does do a great job of alluding to the previous film's body horror as shown with Anthony as he appears to be rotting from the inside out. It got to the point where it was actually really difficult for me to even look at Anthony, but I was still missing that level of fear that I saw in Tony Todd's Candyman. In the end of the film, Anthony fulfills the original Candyman's plan and joins the hive when Burke cuts off his hand, dresses him in a brown coat, gives him a meat hook, and then calls the police on him. Yeah, I was confused by that too. I personally took this as Burke's attempt to save the neighborhood from further gentrification. If Cabrini Green continued to be a crime-infested neighborhood, then maybe white people would be hesitant to move in, stopping the cycle of gentrification there. But I don't know. I mean, I'm honestly just as confused as the rest of you all, but that's just my take personally. Overall, I'd give this movie 3 out of 5 stars, making it lukewarm tea. It wasn't horrible by any means, but it wasn't amazing either. I think the film overextends itself in some parts where it should have just stuck to the basics. And for the love of God, Tony Todd was completely underutilized in this film. How are you going to establish a universe where there are multiple versions of Candyman and then wait for the last 30 seconds of the movie to show the original? Tony Todd is one of the pioneers of horror films and definitely deserved more respect and airtime than that. But congratulations to Nia DaCosta for making history and being the first Black female director to debut at #1. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my review. If you have a different opinion of the film, I'd love to hear it, so make sure you leave a comment down below. And if you haven't already, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that way you always know when I post a new video. And I'll see you in my next movie review.